Mexico stand with this idea to share Mexico through hospitality and food and experiences, and came to New York in 2010 and have built taquerias around the city and started to go into new markets with those taquerias. And in every taqueria, all the touch points in the restaurants, the salsas and the tortillas and the sodas are all CPG products that we created to tell the story of Mexico. And we started selling Vista Hermosa. We also have a lot of bags here for everyone to take, and they go good with noodles. And we started selling Vista Hermosa, and we're in 3,500 doors around the country with tortillas, corn and flour, totopos, which is Mexican for corn chip, and frozen burritos, which we have also in that same distribution network.
Super, thank you. Let's start by taking kind of the temperature of the industry. We're going to take you guys down before we take you up. COVID brought kind of an insatiable appetite for products. Capital was around and there was a lot of it and many brands launched. Now we've got inflation, capital has become somewhat tight and people are price sensitive. And so, Kiernan, how has the current economy impacted Deep?
So I think it's interesting when you think about this, and I was also in the industry in the Great Recession, and anytime you have economic challenges, people talk about value. And for me, value, first of all, it's relative, but most people think it's price. It's not just price. It's also, price is one component, but also it's relative to the benefit, right? So when I think about premium CPG, it's actually a good time to be in premium CPG. So if you look at it, there's always kind of trade down when there's economic challenges, right? So if you're a big CPG and you sell mid-priced convenience foods, there's often going to be trade down to private label or to value brands. But if you're truly a premium experience and you can provide not a mediocre restaurant experience, but a good premium restaurant experience in the home, you're actually going to get some trade down from restaurant, or you're going to create new consumption in CPG. So for me, I think it's actually a good time to be on the premium side of CPG, but the consumer is going to trade down. The consumer is going to do things that hurt companies like Kraft, Conagra, et cetera. So,
Marguerite, what have you guys been seeing in the industry as of late?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're unique in that. So we have restaurants interested in CPG, and we've always had restaurants at vastly different price points. We've had 2 Michelin star restaurants. We've had a $30 check average restaurant. We've had fried chicken sandwiches in Madison Square Garden. And we've always had customers that move across them. Maybe once a year they would go to Co for their anniversary, but they would go to Noodle Bar on a random Tuesday once every couple months. And so exactly to your point, we see CPG as kind of one other extension of that brand. So something that someone might eat at home when they get home late, want a quick meal, that's not eroding them coming to the restaurant. It's just one more touch point that we can have with them. And I agree on, we always talk about value being, does someone walk away and feel like for the dollars they got something? And that's how we think about value, as opposed to it being, as you were saying, like a fixed dollar amount. But so I would say, yes, things were happening in the pandemic that were, there was a lot of funding, there's a lot of things happening, but I think the opportunity is huge today. And I think specifically, if you look across all these brands, they all exist in what, is deemed the global flavors aisle by the supermarket. And that is one of the fastest growing aisles in supermarkets today. It's like in some groceries, we got a stat that it's replaced Better For You as the #1 growing piece of the store. And so while, yes, people are spending less, all these things are happening, we're actually existing in a pocket of the market where there is a lot of growth.
Super. Dario, how important do you think solid business fundamentals are today versus just growth?
Well, I think they've always been important. As far as cost of capital, I think that's really probably the difference today versus the previous decade, where capital was more focused on growth and earning market share versus business fundamentals. I mean, I think it depends on investors, and this is a gross generalization, but there's definitely been a shift in investors very focused on companies that show profitability and have those fundamentals in place. I think, in order to scale any business, you want to make sure you have that infrastructure in place to grow. And I think cheap capital can sometimes mislead companies down a path. So I would kind of say like the current environment is almost like the best time to start something, because you really have to prove the basic economics of your business. And this is the best time to learn how to fight, this street game that you have to play to get your business to a certain size.
Super. I just want to pivot a little bit to you guys in your careers here. Marguerite, in taking on the CEO role at Momofuku, what were you charged to do when you took on that role?
Well, so I started probably, let's say, 6 months before the pandemic became a very top priority and concern for everyone. So I would say, I don't think it changed. I just think it expedited a lot of decisions that we were going to make. So diversification of the business was always a top priority, but the speed in which we moved into CPG, the speed in which we moved to like national shipping and even delivery. A lot of our restaurants maybe did delivery during lunch when it wasn't that busy, but it was never really core to our restaurants. And so on every level, kind of rethinking the business as a whole and what we needed to be successful. I would say A, in the pandemic, but B, I would say in general, because I would argue that a lot of the things that happened during the pandemic were almost like an expediting of existing conditions, in that food costs was going up, labor was going up, which is not a bad thing. Rent's going up, utilities are going up, like everything was getting harder and harder. And the pandemic in a lot of ways just made that happen in 2020, as opposed to what might have naturally happened over time. So I would say, yeah, really looking at the business. And what I think about a lot is when I started working at the company, I started in 2011. There were 4 restaurants, a magazine. Dave had just done Mind of a Chef on PBS. We were a multi kind of pronged business. And I think pre me becoming CEO, the business took institutional investment for the first time. And so I think the definition of growth became very literal. It was like, you have X restaurants, you should have Y restaurants. And so really on this kind of path of physical brick and mortar expansion. And I think what I did and what I wanted to do was very much like, let's go back almost to the beginning of when it's not about just more doors equals, more revenue, but how do we think about the business holistically and what's the right pieces to be part of the whole?
Super, Kiernan. Deep has been around since 1970s. And so you came on in 18. And what was your charge when you joined the company?
Yeah, so Deep Foods is our parent company. It's owned by 3 generations of an Indian family. I'm not part of the family. I probably tell. So the history of Deep Foods is as a manufacturer originally selling to Indian grocery stores. There are about 2,000 Indian grocery stores in America, and the company manufactures and sells over 800 branded products in that channel. So when I came in, they already had that infrastructure. So it was kind of an embarrassment of riches, but we had a brand called Tandoor Chef, and that was the brand that we sold to natural and conventional. So I came in to run that, and that was really a turnaround. That was a small declining business, and I joined in late 2018. So the first step was to kind of try to stabilize that. We rebranded it to Deep Indian Kitchen in 2019, built out some infrastructure in terms of go-to-market. Even though Indian grocery is grocery and food is food, they're really 2 different businesses, different industries. So we had a lot of capabilities that we had to build from the ground up, had to build, basic S&OP things, operations, build a sales team, build a marketing team, all while trying not to lose our shirts on a business that was declining and rebranded. So when I first came in, it was very much a turnaround. Now we're a rapid growth business. I think I prefer growth challenges more than turnaround challenges, but we've seen them both. And, I've just been fortunate since then to build out an amazing team, some of which is here. And we're off to the races.
Super. Dario, as a founder who had no prior food experience to Tacombi, correct? What was the opportunity that you saw that you were like, screw this, I'm going to do this?
didn't come to that screw this moment. I grew up in Mexico and had that the benefit for what I wanted to do of just seeing what things were like in Mexico and what things were not like, outside of Mexico. And I had to do a business plan as a university course and saw that the market opportunity for Mexican food in the United States was quite large. And I think in the 70s, companies like Taco Bell and so on started creating, the American palate for Tex-Mex and Mexican food, and Chi-Chi's and all these different brands on the border were popping up all around the country. And the same thing was happening on the CPG side. There were all kinds of products, Tostitos and all this kind of stuff that were close to Mexican, but didn't really, hit home for the Mexican consumer. And I started to see that there was this opportunity where there's 50,000 Mexican restaurants in the United States, which is about $70 billion of consumption and roughly the same size on CPG. And that was kind of the moment where we said, well, what if we create a brand that's founded in Mexico that, Mexicans would be proud of, and take this approach to tell that story of Mexico and highlight the diversity of the country. And that kind of matched up with this market opportunity that we saw. And so that was kind of what led to starting Tacombi. At the time, it was just a taco stand on the beach, and my parents were like, "What the fuck?" It's like, that was the screw this. But we went from there. In the taco stand was where I got my learning in how to make food, and we took that to New York, and then New York, the pressure cooker that it is, forced us to develop a hospitality game, and that was really what allowed us to get going. Our first location in Soho, in Nolita specifically, and from there we've built Tacombi.
Both Tacombi and Momofuku have had restaurants now for a long time. I think 2004 is when the first restaurant launched for Momofuku. What was the thinking for you, Marguerite, when the company entered CPG? What was the desire for it? Like, why go from restaurants into that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were looking at a lot of data. I think one piece which we mentioned is just that we had, between Dave Chang and Momofuku, we had over 2 million followers on Instagram. 90% of those people didn't live in cities in which we operated restaurants. So we knew there was always this outsized brand awareness that we were unable to capture unless we, had a single concept that we wanted to open 50 of them. But even if we did, that roadmap, as everyone knows, is, that's a very tough road and a long road, right? Like, we are not the people who are going to do that and do it quickly. So I think when we thought about how can we reach a broader audience, which I think for Dave and I became infinitely more important over time. I think Dave obviously started out, Michelin stars were important, New York Times ratings were important. I think the older he got and the more he saw, we came to the realization that we were only feeding a very, very small percentage of the population. And that was going to be the case unless we thought about doing things differently. So for us, if we wanted to change the way that people eat or change what people define as the American pantry, the way that we would do that is through meeting people where they are, which is grocery stores. And I really think, similar to the journey that you was talking about, like, I truly believe that how people learn about things and how they then consume them in grocery is they're informed by restaurants. They're informed by, I went to X and I had this flavor. Like, sriracha started as something in the general kind of perception via restaurants, and then it became a familiar flavor that then people sought at home. But it's almost like restaurants do that education that allows the product to then be something that someone purchases themselves. And so it seemed very logical that was like Momofuku in a lot of ways, and what Dave did in a lot of ways basically primed like people's palates and educated people on these products to get to a point where they could cook it at home. And so that, combined with obviously, something that is delicious, that you feel like you can eat consistently from a nutritional value. Like, if you combine that with like what people are craving, which they're learning via restaurants, it made a lot of sense for us to then take that step with the consumer, as opposed to having people go into the market and kind of fill that gap themselves.
Dario, were you CPG always in mind when you launched Tacombi? Like, it was together? How did you guys think about that?
It was. When we designed the brand and kind of came up with the idea, Tacombi itself was a name that was interesting when I first heard it. A friend of mine put these two words together, combi, which is a VW bus in Mexico, and everyone rides one to school or uses it as a shared, the original shared Uber of Mexico City. And then taco, we put those two words together, and Tacombi didn't mean anything. And there was something we were looking for that captured that these things that are ubiquitous in Mexico. And in laying out the framework for the brand, we saw that these other things that are common in lifestyle in Mexico just needed to be taught to how to enjoy that outside of Mexico. So the way that people now, micheladas are common all over the US, but the chili that you put around the micheladas is something that goes everywhere in Mexico, on fruits and salads and all this kind of stuff. And so all those little details of life, there was a way that was already happening in Mexico. And so to make Tacombi feel real, we wanted to put those in the experience, but we wanted to do it with just better quality ingredients, stuff that was more in line with where we want to go with the brand. So then for each story that existed, we created an idea. In the very beginning, it was just, we would take a bottle like this and put a sticker on it and put that in the store or on the table. Not too different from the salsas that you see back on the table there. And so we created this ecosystem of kind of just stories from different parts of Mexico. There's a story about coffee. There's a story about sodas and fruit juices and hot sauces and salsas. And that became part of the decoration of Tacombi. The tables, we created fake tables from fake brands. And then as the restaurant business grew, what we were doing in the kitchen with a sticker on it started to become our supply chain. And it was that evolution of the supply chain that we then had this opportunity to get into Whole Foods, and we put Vista Hermosa into Whole Foods and started building that from there. So it was intentional, but it was a long path. We did it organically and started locally in New York. Along the way, what we tried to do was really use these things to the benefit of the in-restaurant experience. So that was what guided us, is that it had to be of a certain quality that would make the restaurants better. And what it did to our team in the restaurants is it made us really product focused. So the gentleman who started making our first tortillas, became just obsessed with making a better and better and better tortilla. And that led to, us having a really good tortilla in the restaurants. And then that's what led to Whole Foods picking it up, which by the way is their Forager program is totally legit. That's how, we were picked up, how we were brought into Williamsburg Whole Foods for our first stop in our CPG journey. And then we just kept building on that.
Super. Kiernan, you guys, Deep has historically been a CPG brand. However, you guys also have restaurants. And what's been the benefit of being a little bit reverse engineered in that way for you guys?
Yeah, I would say operationally, they're very, very different. But the primary benefits are in marketing and innovation. So you guys talked about it a little bit, where it's like, hey, if people have awareness of your restaurant, they may be more likely to buy your CPG products. And for us, we're not a famous restaurant chain. We don't have celebrity chefs, but the way we use our two restaurants essentially as a test kitchen. So for example, the products we're sampling back there are Kati street wraps. We had those in our restaurants. They did really well. And obviously it wasn't as simple as just taking something that we made in our restaurant and putting it in a package and freezing it and sending it out to retailers. Then we had to go through a process of figuring out how to make this in a frozen form. How could we get as close to that restaurant taste? But it was a really good resource for us to, have consumers experience our brand in a, very tangible way. Look at the POS data on a product that we've been making. See, like, does this resonate or not? Tweak it if it's not, and then if it really is doing well, we figure out how to take that to our CPG business.
So Marguerite, you mentioned like global flavors, and a lot of folks in the audience are also working on brands and that are global flavor oriented. Quality, authenticity are key attributes often for such companies. When you guys were launching your products, were consumers ready for your products, or was it an education for the American palate? Did you guys pivot at all or anything like that?
I mean, I think everything is education to a certain point, and I think we're particularly going into some categories like soy sauce, where people, a vast majority of Americans have that in their pantry. Other things like chili crunch or these noodles, which are a dry noodle, not ramen. That's something that people are learning how to use. I think for us, it's interesting. I think we intentionally don't make many products that are one-to-one with what we do serve in the restaurants. I think it's extremely important to us that the products are authentic to the restaurants, meaning they're a product that we would use in our restaurants. So for example, when we launched the noodles, we actually served them at the Noodle Bar in East Village for a couple weeks because we really wanted to show that there isn't this massive delta and that you can have restaurant quality at home. I think the historical model has been D2C or CPG as almost like diffusion from what you do in the restaurants. And I think what we wanted to do differently was really offer something. I mean, it's very similar where we're offering something that is adding value to the restaurants and that we use the products there, but also you see as an equal opportunity. So for us, I would say everything's an education. I think what has been really beneficial by starting as a restaurant group is having, our Instagram account, having a mailing list, which we basically took our restaurant mailing list during the pandemic, started utilizing that to tell people we now had products. So we weren't starting from scratch in terms of like an authority in the food space. We weren't starting from scratch in terms of an audience that was interested. And so we were able to use that. And then basically a lot of that, like if you subscribe to our email marketing, some of it is, special, some of it is exclusives, but I would say the vast majority of it's recipes. And that's very intentional because it's one thing for someone to buy a product and then put it in their pantry and never use it ever again. What we're trying to do is create routine. We're trying to create these becoming part of someone's pantry. And so for us, education and showing how you can use it is as important as selling the first one, because for us, the first one is really not the win. It's someone coming back and having it be part of that routine. So for us, education, and just for everyone's context, like what's really interesting too is the recipe emails sell as much product as the non-recipe emails. It's not like you're trading off. It's by showing someone how they can use this, that's spurring people to repurchase. But it's also then we have a Facebook group of like super fans that at this point, I don't know, maybe 15,000 people, 20,000 people. And it's like when we post a recipe, the next day we start seeing the photos roll in of people actually using them. And I think that for us is the most exciting thing because you're actually creating a scenario where it is becoming part of their pantries.
Dario, did you guys have to pivot or were you guys right on with the American palate when you started launching the Vista Hermosa stuff? Everybody knows how to use a tortilla at home.
They do. I think similar to what Marguerite was just talking about in terms of tactics, we want to do this. Like this is in our plan to start doing more of this because there are those basics. I think, in terms of American consumer habits, the taco night is just fully ingrained in many parts of the country, and Margarita night and Taco Tuesday and those kinds of things. There are many different ways that things are done in Mexico that we can educate people on. So I think it's taking them further. I think there's generally been a trend over the past 20 years of less sugar and more spice, I think in CPG and the consumer kind of going in that direction. So there's a lot of opportunities to bring Mexican into, the routines at home and add those different things that where the consumer finds an experience or something, whether it's in a restaurant or on vacation or something that they can then replicate at home. And we're not there yet in terms of our team to execute this, but we are looking to build more of that education and training, right? The restaurants are great and our CPG, is strongest in the ecosystem where we already have the most of our restaurants. And where we're building that, it's getting better. But where we don't have restaurants in the other parts of the country, being able to get that extra, push with the right type of education and marketing is something I think any growing brand, has to find that right way to connect with their customers. So,
Kiernan, how's the American palate been receptive to Indian? Is it finally there?
We're not quite the Mexican, but we got a ways to go. So, I mean, we've been around for about 5 years now as a brand. As recently as 3 years ago, we were number 4 in frozen Indian. We're now number 1. However, the small market, right? So a lot of our job is, how do we grow that pie? And education is a big part of it. Authenticity is a big part of it. I think what's particularly interesting with global flavors, if you want to play the role of being the educator, you also have to be authentic. So there are things that we can do as a fully authentic Indian brand at the product level to try to educate that if my name were Amy or my brand were Amy's, it'd be harder for me to do, right? So that's actually one of the big insights we have in terms of global flavors is, and this is somewhat analogous to restaurants where, if you say to your family, I want Indian night tonight, or I want Chinese night, or Thai night, Vietnamese night, you're not going to TGI Fridays for their version of that, right? You're going to that authentic mom and pop place that serves you the food that they grew up in. They grew up in that culture that you want the real deal. So for us, being a single cuisine focused brand is really important. For us having that heritage of being the brand that the Indian community eats is really important, because then we can play that role of educating people on, what is authentic Indian cuisine. We can do things like, play around with the product name. So for example, if you're Indian, you go to Indian restaurants, palak paneer, saag paneer is a popular dish. Majority of Americans don't know what saag or palak is. So we call that our spinach paneer. Why? Because people know what spinach is. We can get them to understand that paneer is cheese. And it's like, oh, spinach, cheese. I like both of those. And then we have items like butter chicken. Same thing. Like everyone likes butter. Everyone likes chicken. So it's a good way to get people into the cuisine. And then once we get them in, we educate them, what is good Indian cuisine versus mediocre Indian cuisine. Then we can spread them out throughout the cuisine, build their baskets a little bit more. So we have a big role to play as kind of the torchbearers of the cuisine to introduce people, educate them, and then show them everything else that we have.
Got it. I want to dig in a little bit onto kind of your products a little bit further. Restaurants view their products kind of as like the pinnacle of food, right? A la minute, live. And I've heard from clients who are concerned that once they let go of control, their products aren't going to meet the level of the restaurant. And so, Marguerite, how have you guys maintained that restaurant quality with your CPG?
So I would completely disagree in that you have infinitely more control in CPG, unless you are a single restaurant, single operator where you are at the pass and you're seeing every single dish go out and you are tasting every single thing. You have every single night, like I think I'll give you a comp. If you see a great movie and it wins the Academy Award, you can just watch that movie and it's exactly as they intended and it's exactly what it is. If you get 2 Michelin stars or you get a great review, every single night you are trying to replicate that exact meal that person had. And it's like one of the toughest things in the world. So I think, I'm a masochist because I literally do this, but I think it's the hardest thing to operate a restaurant and to have it be consistently at its top tier. And so I think that what CPG allows you to do is to, make that recipe. Obviously, there's so much work that goes into then translating that to something that can be consistently produced at the right price point with the right flavor, all the testing, that's massive. But once you're there, then your ability to, open up a package of our noodles or have chili crunch and have it be what I intended it to be is actually in my opinion, easier. So I think I think as long as you can use the ingredients you want to use at the price point you want to be at, and you can stand behind what goes into it and the process and everything, I personally don't see it as a loss in quality. And I think, a lot of that is education too, right? Where Americans inherently think that frozen food is not great when frozen food is the most nutritious food in a lot of ways. Frozen peas are, I would say 90% of the time better than fresh peas, unless you have really good fresh peas. And so I think a lot of it too is kind of recalibrating what people think of when they think of something as being better or healthy, and a lot of times these tools that, we've created over the years actually produces a more consistent, better product. So yeah, I don't know, that's my, at least the
Yeah, no,
perspective I bring to
I
it.
think that's great for people to hear. Dario, what do you think? And how have you balanced like your own manufacturing and co-packing to achieve the desired result?
I mean, I completely agree with what Marguerite said. It's, I think in the manufacturing process, there are a lot of amazing examples out there. What we like to look at are, examples of, there's, Japanese products and German products, which, you often hear of these, countries for being famous at how they manufacture other items, right? And the way that they manufacture food and bring that detail and that attention, I think is inherent in an approach to manufacturing. And so aligning yourself with co-packers, manufacturers that think that way has been helpful to us. Was as we took on capital to grow, we brought in some big CPG manufacturers from Mexico that had done that before, to kind of be there to counsel us and provide us with support as we went out to find co-packers to grow what was beyond the walls of our factory. And so we started manufacturing tortillas at a very small scale in one of our restaurants here on 24th Street. And then when that hit capacity, we started making more tortillas at another restaurant on 33rd Street. And when that got crazy, people carrying buckets of corn up and down Broadway and that kind of stuff, we moved to a factory at Rutgers where we took on 5,000 square feet. And with each step, we learned a little bit more how to scale. And until we made this most recent step, and we've now scaled that factory, which is in Brooklyn. And so it's a process. Marguerite and me were just talking about this, but before you constantly, it breaks and you got to build it again. And so it's just, how do you put that focus and develop that partnership with those people who are manufacturing your product to make sure that they're executing it as you would. And what we've been learning from people who have done this before us is, you have to place your people on the line at the time that it's being manufactured so that they're overseeing how it's being done. These are measures that we're stepping into as we grow. But it really, in order to deliver, an experience that people trust, and especially as you're playing in higher qualities of food, and as Marguerite was referring to, I think like the consumer is demanding, less ingredients, less chemicals, less preservatives, all this kind of stuff. So very clean labels, in fresh and frozen is usually the best way to get it to people. So how do you get the product to work in that cold chain around the country has its other challenges. But a lot of this stuff has been going on before, and so there's a lot to build on. And I think what we found to be helpful is like networks like this, is finding people who have done that before, taking that learning and then applying it to the system. So it's a never-ending process. So.
Once you guys are all passionate brand advocates, and Kiernan, I want to ask you what making the product is one thing, but getting it onto the shelves is another. So can you talk about that process for your products?
How much time do we have? Yeah, look, it's a lot of what we do is how do we figure out our distribution, and particularly early days, you need to have a distribution strategy, but it's all expensive no matter where you go. So classically, people start in natural and then they progress to conventional and mass, et cetera, et cetera. I wish it were all that neat and easy in the way we did it. It was a little more convoluted because we were turnaround. But I think early days, when you're maybe not big enough to buy data, you're pitching your hopes, your dreams, your vision. If you have a restaurant, like quality of your food, and that'll work well for you. More likely in the natural channel, right? If you're talking to Walmart or Target or Kroger or one of those, it's your data, and that's really, really what matters. But I think early days is about building a few case studies, right? This is what I did at Whole Foods. It turned really well. Whole Foods gives you data. You can use that, take that to your regional grocer or your Kroger and say, hey, I can do for you what I did for Whole Foods. But I would say the word to the wise here is start small before you try to go big. You know, there are brands out there who decided the best place to launch was Walmart, or the best place to launch was Kroger. And if your back of the house is not, if you're trying to stand up a manufacturing facility, if you're trying to set up your supply chain logistics, and you're not ready for Walmart, there's no tolerance. And if you then get discontinued, we've got years ahead of you and a lot of fees and problems and things like that until you're back. So you may not survive. So you got to be careful about your distribution strategy. You got to start with the retailers who are going to be more receptive to what you're doing, with the shoppers who are going to be more receptive to what you're doing, and then gradually build that up until you're ready for some of those bigger chains, because they're just different demands in different channels. And they're all hard to get into, but by the time you're in the big guys, you better be hitting those velocity hurdles. You better not have fill rate issues, or someone else is taking your spot.
Dario, once you guys are on the shelf, how do you guys stay on the shelf?
Well, at this point so far, it's really, I think, hitting those metrics in terms of fill rate, making sure that you can, deliver on the agreement that you set up with the retailer. It's been a challenging phase in this first step. We've had, our mishaps along the way. We got into Sprouts and we couldn't get it to stick. And unfortunately, we lost that account. So we've got, a lot of work ahead of us to get back in there. We found a lot of success, I think, using the right merchandisers and building, getting the right hungry merchandising team. We actually had someone who was on our sales team go off and start a merchandising company, and that merchandising company has, been getting us these beautiful pyramids in every place where we found a retailer that wants to take us. And then the product itself, I think, like the velocities we've been seeing, flour tortillas and corn tortillas, as we said before, like these are things that people already had in their routine. And so once we've got them to taste these, I think it's really been the product itself that's keeping it going. And so make sure that the product is, always consistent, which similar to keeping the Michelin star in the restaurant. Like it's that hard. I've not had that challenge of a Michelin star. It's not how we play at Tacombi, but and there are taquerias that get Michelin stars. Apparently, that's for those of you who've seen the news in Mexico. So which is, I think, but the challenge of keeping that up in terms of food quality is I think what it all comes back to. I think that's why I buy food. I think that's why, the type of consumer that, going back to your question at the beginning of this conversation about where is this going, there seems to be an ever-growing consumer that places a big premium on having quality in their pantry. And more of that. It seems to be a big and growing segment where people are proud when they open up their fridge or their pantry to see certain brands that, cost double, triple what they used to be paying for, right? Like, us versus Mission tortillas is, probably 4 or 5 times, right? Like for the prices we sell tortillas in the United States, it would cause civil war in Mexico, right? So but the quality is there, right? The process, and we're not charging exorbitant margins. It's a fair margin, but it's based on a process and an artisanal process we've scaled up. And I think that's more what the supply chain is allowing nowadays. It's allowing consumers to get these clean label products sent to them quickly from the manufacturer. So there's things that are helping us. Same things like delivery in restaurants. We could never do delivery in our early days, but we were able now to plug into a system that gets that done for us with, the distribution and everything. And so there are certain things that I think are benefiting the consumer now to get high quality, and then those that are voting for that. So it's a combination of a number of things, but I think it's always going to come down to executing on quality.
Yeah. And one thing I would just add, not every business has this option. And I think obviously playing in refrigerated or frozen makes it infinitely more complicated. But I think at least for us, playing in D2C to start before going to retail gave us to the narrative of what you're selling to a buyer, a lot of credibility to be able to say, we have a wait list of X number of people trying to purchase this product, or, we were able to move this much product in this much amount of time. So while we didn't have any retail data, we were able to provide sales and interest and press articles and everything. And so I think D2C as a long-term business plan has gotten more and more difficult over time. So I suggested, I guess, less so as like an end goal and more so as a way to get your product out there to people to start. If you think about education, that on D2C is infinitely easier than in retail, right? Where you're going through all these middlemen, you're, putting up displays, what can I fit on the back of this packaging? It's just so much harder. Whereas on D2C through your channels, email marketing, website, et cetera, it's much easier. So I think that's kind of like a first step that like tees you up for what's next. It was super beneficial for us. And we were allowed to manufacture in those smaller quantities that might not fly at Whole Foods, but worked for us. And we use it in a lot of ways as like a experimentation in the same way that you use restaurants where we can make 5,000, 10,000 of a product, see how it sells, see how it resonates. And then if it works, we then start investing more in infrastructure. And I think we have like a running list at Momofuku of like acronyms and idioms that none of us knew until CPG. One of them in real estate, which is like clicks to bricks, which is becoming more and more prominent, whether that's like, Casper now having a brick and mortar. I think we see that too in terms of D2C products that have been successful and moving into more conventional retail. So that I think as a strategy and a way to kind of gather data has been really helpful for us as a business.
I just want to dig into the retail question a little bit further with you. As you guys have expanded, were there any type of stores that you didn't want Momofuku to be associated with? There are high-end stores, there's low-end stores, there's club stores. Was there any kind of vision that Momofuku needed to be here versus there, or were you open to omni-channel anywhere all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as our goal has always been to meet people where they are. So I don't think there's any stores that we don't want to be in. I think it's more so stores that we don't think we're ready for. I think that there's to go into much wider distribution in conventional retail or in club, you just have to nail it and you have to do so well. And we have, just been cautious about making sure that we're not overextending ourselves, both from a supply chain, but also just from an education, right? I think the more grocery we're in, the more general awareness there is. And that then helps us as we keep going further. So for example, with certain retailers like Publix, we had the option to go national, which is, all their stores in Florida and Georgia. But we actually asked them if we could take a subset of the stores, try it out, see how it resonated. And based on that success, we're now national. But we didn't have the conviction that everywhere and everyone was ready for these products, whether it's because of the price point, because it's a new category that's emerging. But we really want to basically prove out at every turn that we could make that jump and then keep going. And so that I think has, so the definition of where we want to be today is going to be fundamentally different of where we want to be in 2 years. And like, that's great. I think it's really just a ever evolving process.
Yeah, you mentioned D2C and your consumers are more engaged with you guys than brands ever have been before. Just want to hear from each of you, what marketing efforts have really paid off for you, whether it was social, digital, traditional, print TV, what works for you guys? Kiernan?
Actually, I'll touch on the DTC point as well. It did not work for us. Like everybody else in CPG, we tested in 2020 because stores shut down. So I think on DTC, it depends. And I think you're smart to think of it as really as marketing. And if we were to do it, it would be marketing for us as well, because it depends on your purchase frequency, your purchase cycle. It depends on how heavy your product is. It depends on if you have to send it in dry ice and how many days you have to send it. So for us, the unit economics did not work. We were asking people to try us for the first time by buying 2 years worth of Indian food based on the purchase cycle. But you can see this didn't scale. So for us, and this gets me back to your point, we do actually do extremely well in e-commerce, just not DTC. So when we started testing that in 2020, around the same time, Instacart started doing ads on Instacart. Anthony's the expert back there, he's just bad for us. But that started to work well for us. So online pick and delivery started to work really well for us. Performance marketing started to work really well for us. And we leaned more and more in that. And we're a millennial brand, I'm sure you guys are too. That's where our consumer is. They shop online at a higher rate than other consumers. But if I step back and say, hey, what's worked for our brand is going to work for everybody else's brand, I think that's absolutely wrong. Look, in my career, I think I worked on 10-ish brands. and different categories, different brands, the same marketing does not work across all of those. So I think the process we went through when we were a young brand is we just tried a lot of stuff, and it wasn't, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like, we had some ideas, we had some theses, and we would go test that out. And then if something worked, we would double down. Something didn't work, we'd go away from it. And we continue to have that test and learn mentality. So part of this is, where is your consumer? What resonates with them? But also, what is your competition doing? Where's the arbitrage opportunity? If all of your competition does billboards in Austin around the Whole Foods headquarters, then you're probably not going to be the one that stands out if you put up a billboard, right? So figure out where your competition's not, test and learn things, see what works. Generally speaking, early stages, you're going to do scrappier social media, digital stuff. But if your competition is doing all the same digital stuff that you're doing, you better find what they're not doing in digital and see if that works for you. And that was our approach. We found some stuff that worked. We've doubled down, we've tripled down, and now we're at later stages, and we're starting to get to things that we've kind of sweat them so much that we have to find the next thing. And that's when we're going into another test and learn process with new tactics, and kind of that cycle just keeps going.
Marguerite, what's working for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything there, where it's just finding where you're differentiated. And so I haven't checked in a while, so this could be really outdated. But when we were making soy sauce, we looked at what Kikkoman's following on Instagram was, and it was, not great. And so I think for us, we really saw as like there. And I'm sure it's the same, I would love to see what Mission has on Instagram, but it's like looking at where there isn't brand loyalty and where there isn't kind of this more holistic approach to the ingredients, to the story, to how you use it, and then really targeting that as the area where you can differentiate. And so it's not just to your point about your product, but also like, what is in most of the soy sauces that people are buying in conventional grocery, and why is this differentiated? And so I think looking at it both from your specific product, but also the landscape of what's out there. So, and I completely agree in terms of what works now is not necessarily going to work for you in a year from now, 2 years from now. I think, we haven't done any of this, but as we scale retail, starting to have conversations around linear TV and all of these things that we never would have thought about a couple of years ago when, we were regionally in certain grocery stores. So I think it's maintaining that core, I think, has been really important to us. So D2C is still something we prioritize because it's where kind of our top percentage of customers are, and making sure we're continuing to feed that audience, because those are the ones, those are the ones that one person is going to tell 20 people they know that they love the products. And that's not necessarily what you're going to get on retail. And I think the one other thing I would say, which has been a learning curve, is also meeting your customer where they are, meaning as your customer maybe was D2C, but now, hey, it's available in National Whole Foods. I pick it up there because it's easier for me. Don't try to force behavior to the area in which you want it to be. So Amazon's a great example where instead of treating Amazon as this thing that we're like, oh, we don't want people to shop there, we want to work here and here. It's like, well, how can you make the margins on Amazon work for you? Because if someone's going to buy it on Amazon, they're going to buy it on Amazon. And that's, to be a successful business, I think at a certain scale, you need to accept that, live with that, and like figure things out from there. So I think our customer base has really shifted where they are. And then it's our job to kind of keep pace and make sure that we're continuing to meet them at their preferred channel, and go from there.
Dario, how are you guys engaging with your customers and keeping them?
So we, as a company, we don't have a marketing budget per se. We invest very little in marketing. I think where we've been very fortunate or strong to acquire the capabilities is within our people. And so our sales team is, I'd say, highly relationship driven with the brokers and the distributors and the retailers, and over the years, they've used our taquerias in ways to kind of bring them together and create excitement around the product and the story. And so I think like that, combined with the same thing with each of the retailers where we have access, really going in and building those relationships one at a time, I think is resulting in these really nice velocities that we're seeing there. But it's like old school relationships and doing it, I think, from the heart. And that over time, I think, we've been able to place racks in certain stores, and those help get us that permanent space and the extra visibility where, you'll see just our tortillas on their own rack, and that helps a lot. So that's kind of, I think, like another old school thing and we're going to probably do that for a while longer until we, have enough breadth to start engaging this next level of tactics. We want to go there and we want to get more of our story out. I think we're still at a stage right now where we want to build that kind of human relationship throughout the network, and that's where the restaurants have really been, that secret weapon, because can give people margaritas and tequila, get them to relax, as you go through the sales process, but it does come down to that like human connection, I think, for us.
Super. Everything we've talked about thus far takes money. Well publicized that both Momofuku and Tacombi have raised outside capital. For you, Dario, what was it? When did you realize that you needed to go outside to achieve what you wanted to for cash?
I had always known it. It just got no for a long time, and I think it's just a process. It's like you're not big enough, and so until we got to a place where, it made sense, and we could also, more than anything, I think, find partners that we aligned with, right, and that's where I think we were really happy to meet the team behind EHI, and so Danny Meyer's partners, and their approach to hospitality and restaurants is very much aligned with our values and how we built our company. And so it was a combination of being at the right size, but in that dating process, we met lots of people over 3 or 4 years before we made the decision. And then, since then, just been really happy with that arrangement.
Marguerite, how was your trajectory?
Yeah, I think similarly, we always looked at capital as it's the people and it's strategic capital as opposed to cash. And so I think, especially being a restaurant group where we didn't have a ton of built-in authority or experience in CPG, it was really important for us as the business grew to have people around the table that could bring a more conventional perspective on CPG. So I think we always looked at it as you never want to be 100% one and 0% the other, but more so, how do you partner what we've been able to kind of just like scrappily figure out with someone who can see around the corners. And so we very much, when we were looking for capital, wanted to find someone who could be a value add as we thought about growth and expansion. So that was super important. And yeah, I think a long process. Like I think it's soon. And one thing I will say about the CPG kind of community at large is how unbelievably like kind and generous everyone has been with their time. And so, when we first started making products, we were already having conversations with, other founders or other businesses that were much further along in the journey. And so before we were even in a position where we did want to raise capital, we had already had a bunch of conversations with a bunch of different people, and trying to understand what would be helpful actually from capital that came in. But yeah, I think, I personally think that coming from a restaurant background, like this kind of hyper growth 2020, everyone has money, growth is number one, not profit. I think that just coming from restaurants, like that's just not how restaurants work. It very much is about profit and very much about a sustainable ecosystem. And I think from day one, we always wanted to prioritize that in the business, and that the way we looked at it is we always want to have optionality. We wanted to have optionality to keep doing what we were doing, grow as we could grow, or bring in outside people, but really wanted to, from day one, whether it's on D2C being first order profitable, whether it's just, making our margins sufficient that, and scale, as I mentioned, kind of on a stair step, we wanted to make sure that when we needed capital, if we needed capital, those were all choices we were making, as opposed to prioritizing hyper growth that put you in a position where you had to take capital and you might not like your partners as much as if you were able to take the time and kind of have a lot of different conversations.
Kiernan, you guys are a little different.
A little different, yeah. We've got a parent company and they fund us, so I'm quite lucky there. But what I would say is, I talk to investors all the time, not because we're trying to raise, But, there's this saying, if you are trying to raise, if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money. And to your point on strategic capital, investors have this incredible, ability to look across lots of different companies and portfolios in our industry, right? So they know a lot that you can't possibly know as an individual operator. So the best investors are, in fact, quite strategic. They're advisors to people. And I have conversations with investors all the time. What are you seeing? Here's what I'm seeing. What's the best practice? What's not? And that's the type of relationship I think you want with your investors. And those sort of discussions, we're not that we're in this position. Those sort of discussions, they aren't going to start when you're asking for a check. Those sort of discussions can happen over time. And then once you've built the relationship, I imagine, if you go to raise, you already know that person, they know your business, they know how you think, you exchange ideas, it's going to be a lot easier. So we're in a different situation. We don't need to raise, we're not going to sell, we're family owned. But to your point, it's an incredible part of this ecosystem. The investors want to share, the other brands out there want to share what's working. So I encourage everyone to take advantage of that.
Super. As we're kind of winding down our questions, I want to ask you guys where each of you see your companies going over the next couple of years. What are your goals, Dario?
Well, when we set out with Tacombi, the goal was to build a global brand. So it's a very long-term plan because it's a big planet. And so, as over the next couple of years, we've gone from New York with the taquerias to 5 new markets outside the city. And in each of those markets, we want to get to the same scale that we have here in the city. We're here in New York, we have 12 taquerias. And there's room for a lot more here in the city. And so we're just trying to find, the right real estate that makes sense for our brand in each market. In the restaurant industry, when you get to about 5 units in a market, you get to some local economy of scale. So that's kind of the tipping point in the restaurant side, where people systems, real estate systems, supply chain systems get more efficient beyond that 5th unit. So that's where we're aiming in Miami, DC, Chicago, and Connecticut and Long Island, where we've gone to, and with Vista Hermosa, which is the marquee product we've taken so far outside of Tacombi. We like to step into conventional and go from the 3,500 doors to kind of where these groups are, in that 10,000, get into a larger audience and start to connect more and more the products and the taqueria experience and keep building that ecosystem. So still like a lot of ground game for us over the next 3 years. Marguerite?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about CPG is, at least coming from restaurants, it's like innovation is constant. And that is true for CPG, but I think everything just moves at a slower clip, and B, so much about CPG is about, just penetration, right? It's number of doors, consistently supplying. And so I think, coming out of the pandemic and coming out of, D2C, I think we had like 12 products in the first 18 months, and everyone, the thing we always talk about is Mike's Hot Honey has Mike's Hot Honey, and they, I think this year, have Hot Honey. And we need to take a bit of a page out of that book, which is just, we have great products that, I stand behind and I use, and it's going well. And so it's how much do you prioritize new development, and whether it's additional SKUs, whether it's, new aisles, how much do you weigh that versus just continuing to execute well, which, as we've all, said and know, that's not that easy either, right? To continue to scale your business, whether it's co-man, distribution, et cetera. So I think for us, we're maybe taking a little step back on new products and really focusing, I would say, over the next year or so on making sure that as we scale, as we open in these new doors, we're doing it in the best way possible. And that truly, I think is a massive, massive part of the business that I think gets missed a bit, especially coming from restaurants where you're like, all right, I did this, now what am I going to do tomorrow? And it's really about, I think, that kind of consistency that that's kind of, I would say, our North Star over the next little bit.
Super. Kiernan, do you want to close it out?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, in this industry, we love new products, right? It's so fun. We have a new product. All the PR is about new product, right? But when you're small and you're trying to build your business, your core is incredibly important. You got to build that first before you proliferate in products. Everything, if you proliferate too fast, it becomes too hard to support. Your supply chain becomes a mess, right? You start to get tail SKUs discontinued. You have financial issues. Launching a new product costs money. So for us, we spent about 5 years building the core. And the last 5 years is all about how do we get into more doors with our core business? And how do we get into the right doors in the right order? And do things like you mentioned is, we're going to launch partial chain in this chain, make sure we're scale up. So we've been doing that for 5 years. We're now in 22,000 doors. Like I said, we're now #1 in market share of a small market. Our focus is now starting to shift. So it's not about just getting into new doors. Yes, we're going to continue to do that. But once we're in 22,000, we're not trying to get to 44,000. Those next 22 will look quite different from the current 22. So it's become now more about how do we expand the market for Indian food. So from a retail perspective, that's going to look like more products in those doors, in those high productivity retailers that we're in. From a consumer perspective, that's going to look like how do we innovate in a way that creates new consumption for Indian food. So our Kati street wraps that we're sampling here today, that for us brings us from a dinner occasion into now a lunch and on the go. So it's expanding the consumption at home of Indian food, right? Even though they're both frozen, that's us expanding beyond the core to an adjacent category. So we'll continue to do more of that over the next several years to try and increase consumption of Indian food. But a lot of what we now have to do across the doors that we're in, this goes back to driving that household penetration. So that means we're going to start to do things that's less about bottom of the funnel marketing and closing a sale. And now it starts to become more, I'm not sure we're going to do connected TV yet, but now it starts to become more about top of funnel marketing, where we have to bring more people into Indian food, make them more aware of what we are, as opposed to finding the people that are already looking for it and closing the sale. So it's a really exciting time for us that we're kind of at this inflection point on our business where we're going from building the core, just getting into more doors and the right doors, to now expanding the product portfolio, expanding what we do in terms of marketing to bring more people into Indian food and more people into our brand.
Super. Thank you very much to you guys for this honest discussion about where your businesses are. We're going to open it up to Q&A. Super.
Anybody have a question?
Hello. My question is for Dario. So you have two business lines, the CPG and the restaurant, and you have investors that also want to grow the business. So I think I read that you wanted to grow your restaurant business to 75 locations in the next years. How do you think about which concept, which format you can scale, and at the same time protect like the hospitality aspect of your restaurants?
So the concept that we've decided to scale is what those of you that live here in the city have maybe tried at our Upper East Side location or in the West Village. So it's in each Tacombi that we've opened, it's the same DNA. I think New York presented us with interesting real estate, and as you go around this city, the challenge of real estate is a little bit different than what you find outside of the city. As we go more out into the country, the suburban markets are really interesting to us, and it's close to the retailers where we have our products. So we have our first kind of freestanding Tacombi, which it looks a lot like what you might have seen in New York, but it's in the parking lot of a Costco, which was a reality check for me after being in New York City and looking out your window and seeing an Olive Garden was interesting. But it's the format that we've decided to go with, and we've focused a lot on the values that we've built Tacombi on in Mexico was all about the in Mexico, there's a love in between people that you see present in any of the food stalls and stands around the country, where how they take care of each other. And that we, think of it as Mexican hospitality. And so we talk a lot about that. It's a lot about the food traditions. It's kind of one in Mexico. And so as we grow, that's really been our biggest challenges, imbuing that, in an ever growing audience. And so as a company, we've leaned on a strategy called managing partners, which Chick-fil-A and Texas Roadhouse are probably the more famous ones for in the country. And they've created programs that really align their leadership with a profit participation, as if it were a franchise, but through a centrally, run company. And so that's the strategy and format we're running with there. And as we grow, we hope to get more merchandising from our CPG products into the taqueria experience, so that, as in delivery and takeout, you can get pieces of that as you grow.
Next question. Don't be shy. Thanks.
Thanks, guys, for being here. I have a question for Marguerite, actually, on the Momofuku brand. So, of course, the origin are with Dave Chang, very famous restaurants. But how do you guys think about, especially as you're accessing new channels, new audiences away from the coast, away from New York? How do you think about building Momofuku as a brand, both with, but also separately from Dave?
Yeah, I think we very intentionally, when we were talking about the CPG products, they're not by David Chang, maybe that's on the back of pack, but I think we very much wanted it to be Momofuku. I would also say, to be completely frank, the success of us as a conventional, CPG business, if it truly hinged on just people who know who Dave Chang is, I don't think we would go that far. I think that exactly as you said, on the coast, on people who are super into food, it's a household name. Dave, when he did his memoir, the publisher actually did a national search of what percentage of the population knows who he is. And it's probably not what any of us in this room would think, as people that are, into food, live near the restaurants. So I think for us, it's really important that it's not hinged on that, and that there is a broader brand. And, the thing that I find super exciting is when our number one Whole Foods, or our number one Whole Foods a lot of times is Columbus Circle, which makes total sense, right? We have a restaurant, and then below it, we have a Whole Foods, and we do crazy numbers there. But for the number 5 on that list to be we just did a off shelf at Whole Foods, and one of the top performers was a Whole Foods halfway between Houston and Austin. And that for us is what's exciting, because that shows that it is pushing further and people are purchasing because they tried it and liked it and they bought it again, or it looked interesting. And for us, that is a lot more as an indicator for success than it being directly tied to whether it's Momofuku as a restaurant group or Dave as a person. So we're definitely working on that. And I think as we scale and as we grow, it's our goal to kind of move into that as its own brand outside of those different pieces.
Anyone else?
Kiernan, you kind of mentioned startups not necessarily having the capital to purchase their own data and the benefit of creating your own case studies. I was wondering if anyone had experience with or just pros and benefits to going ahead and taking the lead to purchase data to support whatever your next step would be.
Well, I should have caveated that by saying it's oral data, but so it pained me when we didn't have the data. And when you can't afford it, and there is a time when you can't, because it's not cheap, you fake it till you make it. Instead of building a data slide for a retailer, you find things on Google that suggest, hey, what I'm doing is trending, and here's this Mintel study that I found, and I didn't buy it, but I found the number that they showed me for free. And you just have to find ways to build your stories, and you have to find alternate ways to see how your business is doing. Right, you look at your fitness data, see what products selling more and what's less, and things like that. So you get around it for a while, and then it is a significant investment. But the more you start having discussions with more sophisticated retailers, the more you have a bigger business. You need it. It's crucial. Like I said earlier, you can sell a vision to the natural channel and the quality of products to the natural channel. You're gonna need data when you go into conventional. And for us, we're at a different stage now where we invest in all the data we can get. We have a team that does data and insights and analytics. That's a luxury that we didn't have in the past, but it's a really, really critical piece of scaling your business once you can afford it. And there is definitely an ROI.
Yeah, I would just say like for us, I think we wish we had done it sooner. Because I think we were building all these stories that if we just literally had access, it would have been extremely straightforward. And so I think we dragged our feet a little longer than we probably should have.
Quick Naturally New York plug. If you are a member, you receive 3 free data reports from Nielsen IQ and access to Spins Ignites program.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this panel. I showed up here with a lot of questions, but a lot of them have already been answered. So thank you for the way that you guys were very open and responding to the question and how you guys built the questions too. So my question is for Dario. I'm curious to hear about your 17-year journey. Can you reflect on the challenges and wins along the way? What did it take to learn things that you didn't know? Or how to do them? Also, what key lessons have you learned that you would share with others considering a similar move? Thank you.
I think the best advice that I got early on that helped me prepare for the journey was from someone I was getting advice from who became an investor, who said to think long term. Right, and I created my first business plan, and it said 5 years, and woo, and everything was going to be great. And they coached me through the process and said, a lot of businesses take at least 15 years to get to a place where they have some kind of stability, and then from there on after, it's a process. And so I think what's helped me the most is to really think long term about it. I think the ups and downs, I think, when you write your financial model and you plug in all your numbers there, usually you just make it go up and to the right. You don't know how to do these ups and downs that are kind of hard to predict. And so I think like in each one of those downs, it requires just faith in your long-term plan, resilience and grit. And I think like what I've learned over the years is just techniques to deal with those downs, because there's been many in the journey, and I think like whether it's meditation or visualization techniques or whatever it is that helps you kind of stop the voices in your head or whatever those might be as you go through this process, each time you hit a roadblock, I think have been really helpful. One investor advisor, reminded me to always play some sport, do something every day, as you go through the process, just to keep your mind clear as you go through that process. And oftentimes, you'll get sick or COVID or whatever gets in the way, and you'll lose those things, and you got to get back on track. So I think like that's been part of it. I think the more important part I think I've learned along the way is that it's about the team or the people that you're lucky to bring into these journeys. And I think in hospitality, one thing that's really special about it is it's a unique breed of human that likes to be on their feet all day, taking care of other people, dealing with all the different things that one deals with in a restaurant setting. And so that kind of introduction for me, because I didn't come from that world, as I think been really special, because it's uplifting to be around people who like to take care of other people all the time. And so I think like as we've grown our company, we've definitely made our mistakes in terms of the old adage of, the right people for the right job, or hire slow and fire fast, and that kind of stuff. And it's a process, but I think ultimately it's, been surrounding ourselves with, people who believe in the long-term vision and who are willing to support it in all the different ways that are necessary. And I think like the best decision, at least for me, was in coming to New York City, was for such an intimidating city, was being able to understand the communities that exist within the city. And I think that's one of the special things about hospitality and retail in New York City is it's like 30 cities in one, and each one of these communities / neighborhoods comes alive. There's almost, at least in my mind, in COVID, there was a bit of a nostalgia for that time when you got to see the community and live the community. It was a time that we were forced to be present every single day, as in our industry, as we were just kind of battling through it. But it also, you got to see the depth behind each of these communities. And so I think that's been one of the highlights in the journey so far.
Super.
Okay.
I think that's it for tonight. We're gonna have one more hour to network, but I want to give my sincere thanks to Kiernan, Marguerite, and Dario for joining.
Applause for our panelists. And thank you to Teepoo, Riaz, sorry for mixing that up before, from Helbraun Levey for moderating tonight's panel. And thank you to all of our brands that are sampling tonight: Deep Indian Kitchen, Seed and Shell, and Ethel's Hot Pies, Sabella Teas, My Vino, Uncle Waitley's, goodness, Harlem Baking Company, and of course, Vista Hermosa. Thank you all for coming.